No, it's been a privilege talking to them and talking to people I grew up with and people I worked with in Mount Sterling, and that community has been very supportive of me. So,
you know, my doc's over in Mount Sterling, Tom McCormick, and he was saying, it's the first thing he sent me a text. Congratulations to your old partner. He's police chief. So they know all about it.
Well, Bob Rogers at church says, "How's Mark doing?" You know, and he's an old guy, even older than me, and he says, you know, he's a big Cathedral Domain guy. And I said, well, I know that. What is Cathedral Domain?
Well, it's a church camp for the Diocese of Lexington, the Episcopal Diocese of Lexington. And the funny story is, I grew up in a family of nine children, and so being number 8 out of 9, I think my parents' parenting skills were a little stressed at that time, so I ran wild at church, and it was the women at the church that said maybe camp would be good for Mark. And it was almost like they picked me up that Sunday afternoon and took me, and I went to camp from middle school all the way through high school, and then once I got on the police department, I went back and started volunteering at camp, and have been there for 18, 20 years volunteering. I love working with the youth, really enjoy that, and it's been very rewarding, keeps me in touch with them. And we did the 100th year at the Cathedral Domain Church Camp last year. This is our 101st, so I've really enjoyed working with him.
Well, he's a big deal, isn't it, with that? And he basically kept it going at a time when the leadership in our diocese was not too interested in the Cathedral Domain, which is a beautiful place out in Lee County and Estill County. It's kind of borders that.
Yeah, we really look at it as a fellowship and mission opportunity in working with youth, and not a money-making proposition. So it really helps shape their lives. It provided me structure in my life, and I like giving that back to the young kids, and it has been a fantastic opportunity for me and a privilege to work with them. So
okay, so after they calmed you down going to camp, how did you ever decide you wanted to be a police?
You know, it's a funny story, and I just talked to my mother this weekend about it, and she remembers it. She's 85 years old, and she remembers it like yesterday. I was always appreciative of law enforcement growing up, and I remember in Mount Sterling, small towns, when we walked the street, everybody knew who we were. It wasn't like we could get away with anything. The police officers would look at us and, boys, you need to get back home. So we would run back home. And I knew at an early age that's what I wanted to do. And there wasn't any changing it. And the guys I graduated with in high school, and they all laugh about it now because I went exactly from middle school to high school to college and became a law enforcement officer. And they laugh because I'm 28 years, and they're like, we're just really getting our new jobs right now, trying to figure out what we want to do. So I was fortunate enough to know what I wanted to do and given the opportunity. So
well, you had some direction, and last week we talked to Officer Don about how did he do it. And as usual, it was because somebody did something for him. The state policeman dug he and his mom out of a snowbank. So it's all about him, you see.
It was the Old Spice.
Yeah. Yeah, it smelled like Old Spice. Yeah. So what's the, okay, so you became a police officer, and you started, was Evans, Officer Don part of the?
absolutely, he was an inspiration to me.
Oh, here we go. He was 308, and I was 308A. We're beat partners.
Yeah.
Right? And who would have imagined at that time that he would be chief of police and I would be a disc jockey? And, you know, you're talking about your grandmother earlier. I told my grandmother that you got promoted because my grandfather, before he passed away, he was sergeant major in the military. He came and rode with us one night when you were the beat partner. And people, when we used to say that Mark and I look a lot alike, I'm a little bit, slightly better looking, but they would say that we look a lot alike. And so my grandmother's always remembered that. And when I told her that you got promoted to chief, she goes, "Really? So what are you doing?"
Yeah, I'm Don the DJ.
Well, I'm a DJ.
Yeah. It's just like in Breckenridge County, the guy that cuts my hair is Mickey Hobbs over at Mickey's Salon, and cuts your hair. You get your hair cut over there.
Yeah,
it takes a little longer.
It does take a little longer to cut mine.
Yeah. And he said that
it's the
his mother would introduce all of the kids, because there's a bunch of kids, and she says, and this is Mickey, he's a beautician. He said, Mom, I'm a stylist.
I'm a radio announcer.
Okay, so tell me some challenges that you're facing.
Well, right now, looking at the challenges nationally that we're looking at, the number one thing we're facing is recruitment. And I think everybody in law enforcement, not only in Lexington, everyone throughout the state and the country, are facing those challenges. There is this discourse with government and authority, and I tell everybody all the time, when you call the police, you're calling an authoritative entity, and that's a last resort. And we'd rather use other resorts before we got there. But that doesn't always happen. So for us to go out and really find quality, diversified candidates, and when I say diversity, I'm talking about 113 or plus languages in the elementary schools in Fayette County right now.
113 languages.
That's a pretty diverse community. And we have to be responsive to understand those cultures and understand what's going on. So when we get those calls, we can service what we need to help them with. And so that's the huge challenge that we have. Lexington is growing, and it is really, the downtown area is redeveloped. The communities outside of Lexington, people are coming in not only for work but on the weekends. And then 113 languages, or 113 plus languages in the school system, that's a huge challenge. Pennsylvania that was assassinated. The two officers that were just shot outside the council meeting in Minnesota. We're seeing that more and more, and not so much as the officers, but as the profession.
Yeah.
And not the people that are wearing the uniform, but the uniform itself. So that tells us now we have a huge challenge of being hyper vigilant, meaning knowing our surroundings and how to respond to stuff, with still being approachable. Because we're people business. I mean, we have to be able to talk to people, interact, and be approachable. So we want to do that. But at the same time, we have to be aware of our surroundings at all times.
Well, officers are in a situation where, listen, we are involved with our citizens, and you know, they're most often going to respond to threats as opposed to cause the threats. You know, that's how we're trained to operate from the beginning. We're sort of behind the game in that way, but tactically you try to do what you can. But as you said, it is a challenge, and sometimes people don't understand that on a traffic stop or whatever. That, you know, it's a fine line. You know, it really is.
I have found since taking the office, a tremendous wealth of support for our agency. That people come in, and usually when I tell the officers, they don't always say it, but we don't ask them to.
Yeah. Because
we have this understanding, when we need them, they're always there. And it's not being taken for granted, but it's just saying, I know it's there when I need it. So we have this support in our community. We have pretty exceptional partnerships with everyone in our community. Our agency's open. People understand our agency. Our Citizens Police Academy does an outstanding job with it. We have programs where people can come in and do ride-alongs with our officers and see what's happening.
Give me a phone number where they can call if they would like to try that.
258-3600. 859-258-3600. So we go through those ride-alongs. People come in from Citizens Police Academy, other parts of the community. That allows them to know the officer instead of knowing just the uniform and seeing what's going on. So that's a tremendous benefit for us.
Well, it's how much time we got?
About 3 minutes.
Okay. So what are some of the initiatives you want to implement?
Well, one of the things that we discussed earlier on is our victims advocates. We've asked for an increase in our victims advocates. That's a part of the criminal justice system, I think, and working in it, and you've been a huge proponent. When you look at that, when you arrest a defendant, the defendant gets an attorney paid for it. They get all these procedures, everything else. The victims, and Donna and I worked homicide together for a long time, and we understand it. There's no one there really for the victims except the victim's advocate. They don't get things paid for them. They don't get the opportunities. So someone has to be on their side to say, here's the expectations, here's what's going to happen. To me, I'm a pretty victim-oriented officer, so to me that's one of the largest initiatives that we're looking at, and increasing our victim advocacy and working along with your office and the county attorney's office, and I think that's going to give us a lot of coverage for them.
Yeah, it's victims feel like, here's what they think. I call it the criminal justice system, and they call it the criminal system because they say there is no justice in it. And we have to try to soften their trip through the criminal justice system as best we can, but in the end, the defendant will end up going to prison and ultimately get out most of the time. And if they're a survivor of a homicide victim, their relative's still dead.
And it never ends. And Mark and I know that you learn when you're investigating these homicides that the family, you get very close to the families.
Right.
And not afraid to get close to the families, by the way. I want to be close to the families, you know. But there's different stages. Once the arrest is made, that's not the end. And once the conviction, it's almost a new beginning. It never closes a chapter.
You know, victims think that if they go to trial, it'll all be better. Well, it's worse because that's just pulling the scab right off of everything.
And then, as we said, then the person's convicted, and now what? And you know,
appeal.
victims.
Well, the beautiful thing about victim advocates is they don't care about the prosecution stage. They don't care about whether we make the arrest. They care about the victims, and that's what they're centered on. Law enforcement, you and I know, Don, when we worked homicide, we focused on capturing the bad guy, putting them in jail, and giving them to Mr. Larson, and prosecuting them. We always had great contacts with our victims and the families, but the advocates solely focus on that. It frees us up to do other investigative points. So the best part of that program is they're constantly devoted to the victim and not the prosecution stage on it, and making sure they're taken care of.
Well, you know what? That is absolutely awesome, and I tell you, the whole victims' rights, the victims' advocacy is so important, and not just for those that are involved in homicides. You know, people who have their homes broken into, that have their peace of mind taken away from them, that have their security. We have to have a voice for those folks and make sure that they know that we're there and care about them. Congratulations on being the new police chief here in Lexington. You've come a long way, and look forward to your tender.
He's not a DJ.
No, hey, it's Officer Don. Anyway, hey, I'm still here, Grandma. All right, we'll see you next week on Impact.